a red flag flying here.
Hello and welcome to The Social Ties. I'm so excited to have with me today Sam Johnson. Hello Sam, how are you?
Hello, I'm really fine, thank you very much. Nice to be here.
Oh, I'm so pleased you're here with us. Thanks so much for coming. I'm also really excited to tell people about what it is that you're involved with. This is a subject really close to my heart. So if we just get right into it, Sam, tell me about the project that you're involved in.
Okay, great. Well, so to start with, we have a charity called the Matchgirls Memorial, which is basically set up to, a prime aim is to get memorials to the Matchgirls. And that includes, you know, a statue and possibly murals and mosaics, all sorts of things, because there's just nothing to commemorate the brave actions that they took back in 1888, which I'll come to in a moment. So also the other thing we're really keen to do is push out on the education side. So we want to involve communities and children, young people, you know, to really remind people of the story and to make people aware who perhaps weren't aware of it before. So we've got a big kind of education program going on as well, with some great people in the charity working with us on that. I mean, we've got brilliant patrons, Diana Holland of Unite, and Barbara Plant from GMB, and Anita Dobson, who obviously people know as an actress. But we also, underneath the charity, we have kind of a support network of trustees and also ambassadors. And the ambassadors have a particular role that they focus on, like women's history or local community or heritage, etc. And each one of them kind of brings something different. And at the moment, we've got a really big push on the education side with a couple of really great people, a combination of a trustee and an ambassador working together. One's a songwriter and one's a playwright, and they're producing some amazing stuff to, you know, to produce for children. We're working in Southampton at the moment, which you might actually find quite unusual. But the reason for that is because we discovered one of the strike leaders of the Match Girls strike actually was born in Southampton. We only discovered this a year ago, and actually it's a funny coincidence because it's where I live as well. So so it's kind of quite nice to have that kind of local aspect to draw on as well. But just if I just step back a bit, so some people might not know about the strike and why we think it's so important to commemorate it with a charity and a statue, etc. And what happened basically was, back in the late 1800s, there was quite a lot of kind of unrest. Factory workers were being treated really badly. There were also a number of social reformers of the day that were trying to kind of push for change. And I believe it was a kind of combination of these factors that came together. So the Match Girls at the factory in Bryant and May, which is in Fairfield Road in Bow in the East End of London, they basically put up with terrible conditions. They had to work really long hours, sort of 12, 14-hour days, 6 days a week. And they did this for very low pay, and there was an unfair fine system. And on top of all of this, they had to put up with fozzie jaw. So fozzie jaw is basically, to make the matches, they used something called white phosphorus. And this was, you know, to enable the matches to strike. But it was dangerous. White phosphorus could cause something called osteonecrosis. And that was otherwise known as fozzie jaw, because it's basically a cancer of the bone which could eat away at your jaw. And it was really terribly dangerous. So that they were also forced to work in the same place that they ate. So they're working there all day. They have to stop for lunch. They had to stay in the same room as these chemicals. And the terrible thing about it was really that there was a more friendly phosphorus called red phosphorus that didn't have the same dangerous properties. But Bryant and May found that using the cheaper white phosphorus was better for business, funnily enough. So they continued to use that right up until the early 1900s, even after the strike, in fact. But the strike action was really driven by the bad conditions day to day, the long hours, the low pay, the fines, the foreman being cruel to the workers, you know, things like that that just weren't on really. And what happened at the same time was there were the Fabian Society, which was a sort of Labour left-wing think tank of the time. They got together, and there were people in this forum like Clementina Black, Annie Besant, George Bernard Shaw, people like this, Sidney Webb, all of the kind of big thinkers of the day as well. And they got together on the 15th of June in 1888. And they actually noted that the Bryant and May directors were actually paying out shareholder dividends of 20% plus and paying their workers starvation wages. So they actually proposed that they boycott the whole sale of the matches. And the result of this was the next day, Annie Besant, who'd been at the meeting, and Herbert Burrows decided to go down to the factory and have a word with some of the girls themselves. And, you know, sure enough, they gave them the whole pitch, you know, the whole thing about how awful it was. And Annie was so outraged, she actually had a weekly magazine called The Link, and she wrote an article in there called White Slavery in London. And it basically just laid bare the whole truth of everything that went on in the factory. And this was published a week later. And as you can imagine, the Bryant and May directors were kind of pretty furious about this, and they threatened Annie with libel. But the other significant thing they did was try to get their workers to sign a document to say that any of the stuff in the article was, you know, just to basically say it wasn't true. And they refused to do that. And there was kind of quite a lot of unrest at this time, as you can imagine. People weren't very happy at all, especially probably I can imagine knowing that somebody out there was starting to champion their cause. And the result was that there was a sacking of, like for some petty reason, so I think it was 3 girls got sacked. And so the word of this got round the factory, and this basically acted as the last straw, you know, and they just down tools and out they went. And maybe not the whole factory all in one go, but in phases as they all got to know about it, they all went out. So about 1,400 workers went out on strike, which is pretty powerful stuff, really. And they actually had written a letter to Annie, which is kind of the Dear Lady letter, which is quite a touching letter that they wrote appealing to her for help, because they saw her as somebody that might be able to help them get better conditions, etc. But so she received this letter and didn't really understand why, until the day after they'd gone out on strike. About 200 of them marched down from the East End into Fleet Street, into Bouverie Street, where she had her office, and basically just rocked up and kind of, like, you know, knocked on the door and said, hello, you know, we're here. So she invited 3 of them up to see her, and she wasn't really in favour of strike action. She didn't really like that, you know, that approach, but, you know, it was a bit late by then. So, you know, as miffed as she might have been, she agreed to help them and get them organised. And although they were very organised themselves anyway to have got this far. So with, you know, they started to have meetings in local areas in the East End, and there was a place called Mile End Waste, and there was a Stepney Meeting Hall. Charrington's Hall was another place. Mr. Charrington, who had a brewery at the time, allowed them to use his rooms to meet. And they slowly but surely, they rallied support from the public and from the newspapers. I mean, the Pall Mall Gazette and the Star newspapers were kind of on board fairly early on, but the Times was a bit anti. But gradually, as they started to make their case and more people started to listen, people started to turn their heads, and then the press started to turn in their favour. They actually went down to Parliament with Annie. I think 56 of them marched down there with her, and 12 of them were allowed in to speak to MPs. And they met Charles Conybeare and Robert Cunningham Graham, who agreed to speak up for them, as Charles Bradlaugh MP had done as well. And so they had the MPs on their side. And then Toynbee Hall got involved. and the London Trades Council, and they agreed to go and have a word with the directors. And basically they had a meeting with them on the 16th of July, which is actually only 14, when was it, the 5th? Sorry, I'm going to have to cut this bit out, I think, while I do my calculations. They walked out on strike on the 5th, and London Trades Council managed to secure a meeting on the 16th. So only 11 days after they'd gone out on strike. And they managed to convince the directors that they would meet with the strike committee that had been formed. And this was made up of 8 of the girls who represented them. And they went in to meet them the next day, and they had some strike demands, which included, stopping the fines and giving them somewhere to eat, that was safe, etc. And with the bosses, they also agreed to form a union, and basically all of their strike demands were met, which was pretty amazing, really. But I think they were probably fairly formidable women. They knew how to stand up for themselves. They were kind of feisty, and they knew what they wanted. So that's what happened, and it was 12 days later, and they won this strike. It was just amazing. But the next thing they did was form a union, and then 7 of the 8 that had been on the committee actually went on to be in the union committee, and they were joined by 5 others, so there were 12. And you may have seen, you can just Google Matchgirls, and there's a famous picture of 12 of them with Annie Besant and Herbert Burrows, and that's the union committee that they formed after they won the strike. And so yeah, it was a great victory. And people think of the dock strike, which was a year later in 1889, as the kind of beginning of the labour movement, the beginning of the trade union movement, at least the new union movement. And actually it wasn't. It all started a year before with the Matchgirls, because the Matchgirls were, there's been the same families as the dock strikers, and they were probably inspired by their female counterparts to stand up and be kind of get the things that they deserved as well. So it was pretty amazing, and what they stand for today, I think, is fantastic. And it's a really, really great story.
It's an absolutely fantastic story, and one of my favorites. And I have seen that photo. I didn't realize that was the committee. That has made it all the more special, that photo. I love it so much. So I mean, God, where to start with that? There's so much to talk about there. You mentioned there were 1,400 of them went out on strike. You're not trying to get memorials for 1,400 women, are you?
No, I mean, it would be lovely, wouldn't it?
It would.
I mean, in the news recently, there was an article in a paper to say that some MPs were trying to get statues for nearly 2,000 Victoria Cross recipients, which is a great aspiration. But it just happens that most of those Victoria Cross recipients are men. And we do have a very terrible shortage in this country of female versus male statues. I mean, it's something very paltry. Like if you take out royalty and unnamed statues and angels and naked nymphs and things like that, there's something like 3% of statues are actually named women. And it has got better in the last few years since, the likes of Emmeline Pankhurst and Mary Wollstonecraft and such like. There's been quite a few more in the last few years, but still we've got a long way to go. And if we suddenly get swamped by nearly 2,000 men, we're gonna have a long way to go. However, saying that, we don't have an aspiration to have a statue to every match girl, as nice as it would be and as tempting as it is. But what we do want to do is get a statue that represents them, all of them, in the East End, and something that commemorates everything that they did, everything that they stand for, and to inspire young people today to basically stand up for their rights. And you can always get what you want if you just well, not always get what you want, but you can always There's no voice too small. You can stand up for what you believe in, and you know, there's always a chance that if you're on the right side, then you will achieve what you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. That's definitely one of the messages we try to get across. No voice too small. I love that. That is just spot on. I mean, I suppose especially nowadays as well, it seems like there's not, I mean, people aren't getting fuzzy jaw anymore, but there doesn't seem to be such a huge difference these days, you know, with the disparity of pay between the owners of the business and the lowest paid within a business. So hopefully this does inspire people to realize that actually that's not quite right, and that their voice will matter. It made a hell of a difference for the Match Girls. So do you know if all the Match Girls ended up going back to work once they started their union?
I believe so, yes. Yeah. So they were all taken back, even the ones that had been sacked. That was one of the demands of the strike. So they were all taken back, and yeah, as far as I know, they all continued to work. And I mean, it was a fairly up and down kind of workforce. I think, you know, that when the work demand was there, and then sometimes in the summer, some of them would go off to Kent and pick hops and things like that. You know, they'd go wherever the work was. But I think when they were really busy, you know, they could go up to 2,000 in the workforce. So it was really important to make sure it was a good, you know, better place to work.
I'm interested as well. You mentioned that the workforce were being given fines. What were they being fined for?
So it was usually very petty things like dropping matches, wanting to go to the loo, being late, you know, anything that was really petty, any excuse really to fine them. And they didn't start out with much money. You know, so if you then have to lose some of it to fines, you weren't left with very much at the end of the week, which is, you know, very unfair.
God, yeah, I can definitely see why they organised themselves, and just another nod to what women can do when they get together and organise. I'm a big advocate for that. As you'll know if you've seen the show, you'll have seen me banging on. I've got my wall of amazing women, and it's growing. So you mentioned there about the education part of it that you're going to do. How are you going to deliver that, and what is that education? What is it going to be? A workshop? Is it going to be books? What are your plans there?
Yeah, so our plans are to give workshops, and this will be around basically focused on young people and youth groups initially. And what we want to do is to get young people thinking about, you know, what they can do themselves, really, to inspire them to think in their own lives what they can achieve, but to draw strength from what the Match Girls story gives them, really. So, you know, we'll use kind of drama and song and art, and, you know, any kind of medium that we can, really, to get the story across, and hopefully to work with schools. I mean, sadly, the Match Girls, not in my time, but I've got cousins who actually remember the Match Girls being taught at school. So it is there somewhere on the curriculum. It just needs to be pulled back to the front of the queue. But we think if we produce some information for schools and youth groups, etc., then, you know, there's every chance that it gets teachers thinking about it again, and they might actually be inspired to, you know, to bring it back to the front of the history lessons. And I mean, not just history lessons, but, you know, politics as well. It's about everything, and it's about empowering young people and making them believe in themselves.
Yeah, I think that's probably the way you'll have to go about it as well. More down the lines of empowering young people and training them in the art of debate and that kind of thing, because I think particularly this government, and I'm sure many before, aren't that fond of teaching trade unionism in schools. And there's Gavin Williamson's just announced that it'll be really frowned upon if you're not, basically in schools, you're not allowed to say anything that would be against capitalism. So that baffles me entirely, because these are the movements, this trade union togetherness and cooperation, these are the things we should be teaching our young people. So, and I can't believe it was actually on the curriculum. If we could find those lessons and get that back on the curriculum, there's a petition we need to start. Get Match Girls back on the curriculum.
Yeah,
Just
I mean,
a wonderful thing.
we have actually found evidence of some lessons that are available. So it's not that it's not there. It's just that they need, you know, maybe bringing to the fore and dusting off a little, which is what we're trying to do. We're trying to help with that process.
Oh, brilliant. That's absolutely brilliant. What just a wonderful thing to do. Can I ask how you came across the project? How did you get involved, and why was it something that you wanted to get involved in?
So about 4.5 years ago, in fact, September 2016, I was doing some family history research, and I was actually researching my great grandfather on my father's side. So I typed his name in with his wife's name into Google, and basically a little kind of plea for help from ancestry.com came up in my Google search from a lady called Anna Robinson. And she was doing some research as far back as 2003. So bear in mind, I'm looking at this in 2016. She had a plea for help in 2003 saying she was doing some research on Sarah Chapman, who was married to Charles Henry Dearman. And she was interested in her because she was one of the leaders of the Matchgirls strike. And I'm like, this is my great grandmother. I mean, it was a kind of jaw-dropping moment, really. I remember I was actually working that day, and I just kind of stopped in a tea break to kind of Google this. And I think it's fair to say, and I don't work for the same employer now, so it's fine to say, I didn't get anything else done all day. I was just kind of, you know, researching Match Girls all day, and just so excited about it. And actually to think that my great grandmother was one of the leaders of the strike, and I knew nothing about it. It had not been passed down through the family. Nobody knew anything about it. And then it popped up because Anna was doing this research. So I then had to find Anna, obviously, because I needed to know why she needed to know. And again, through the power of the internet, I managed to find her. And she had actually, it turned out, had done her thesis, her master's thesis, all about Sarah Chapman and her role in the Match Girls strike. And that kind of led me to be able to learn more about what she did. But also it kind of led to my own research as well. And, you know, we've learned so much more since that time. And yeah, it's just amazing. So we first of all, we got into the whole Sarah Chapman thing and found out more about her. Then we discovered that her grave actually at Manor Park Cemetery was under threat of something called mounding. So we've got a big campaign going to try and save this process of mounding, which means we could lose her grave and other people's graves. That's been going on since 2017. With the help of some unions, we've actually bought her a proper headstone because her grave was unmarked. It was a pauper's grave and it was completely unmarked, and she was just being used as a footpath, basically. So we've got a petition going to try and stop that mounding process, but we've had years of dialogue with the cemetery. They're a private cemetery, so they can do what they like, really. But we've also got the Ministry of Justice on board. We've got lots of MPs backing us and unions to try and get this at least investigated. But we've got a headstone. We've got a fantastic headstone for Sarah. We just can't actually put it anywhere at the moment. So it's a shame. But so that's just one of our campaigns. But then we got on to thinking on a wider sense about the Match Girls. The more we learned about them, the more fantastic we thought they were. And we thought they deserved some kind of memorial. And that's what really led me to decide to start a charity to raise funds to give them all. And this isn't just about Sarah, this is about all of them, to give them all a fitting memorial. And so we've got this amazing team of people. I think there's 18 of us now working on this, and it's just really great. I mean, it's still good. We're still a way ahead, to get where we want to go, but it's yeah, it's very personal to me. I mean, there's so many different angles and facets to this story as well, because obviously I came into this from a family history perspective, and we've got union members involved. We've got very political people who aren't very political. They're just interested in the story. We've got so many different kind of angles. There's also an awful lot of history on the arts, because there were plays written about the Matchgirls in as far back as the 1940s, and we've got a whole load of research on that going on as well. And it's really, really exciting to think that all the different ways that you can celebrate the Matchgirls. We've just recently had our first poetry competition, and we hope to be producing our first poetry book this year at some point. So there's just so many things. I mean, it's almost difficult to remember all the things that we've got going on, really, to tell you about. But it's it's really, really exciting, and it's what's really lovely as well. People are starting to come to us and ask us how they can help, because they want to get involved. Just on Saturday, I was talking to a chap who's so enthralled with the story. He just wants to give us his time and do some research for us. It's just, it's just brilliant that people are so kind of moved by this story, I guess, that they just want to come and help, which is absolutely fantastic. And we welcome help from anyone, because it's such a great story to celebrate.
It is. I am absolutely blown away by the amount of things you've done, and the fact that you're related as well. Talk about standing on the shoulders of giants, dear me. It's so exciting. I love stuff like this. It really interests me. I could probably talk to you for another 4 hours. And again, the fact that she was in an unmarked grave, somebody who'd clearly done something so important as well. It's really sad, and another testament to how women's histories haven't been told, and they don't get remembered, and they just get shoved under the carpet. Another thing that there's a group of us up here, the Women's Banner Group, we're trying to tackle that. There's a severe lack of blue plaques as well. Have you thought about getting a blue plaque for them? Does a blue plaque exist for them?
Yes, well, so there's an unofficial blue plaque on the old, because the old Bryant and May factory still stands in Bow. But not unfortunately for the people that live there, I guess, but it's a gated community, so it's been turned into residential flats. So I think there's about 700 flats in there now. But they have a plaque on the outside. Unfortunately, it just says Annie Besant and the Matchgirls, so it doesn't really pay homage to the actual Matchgirls themselves, really. It just treats them as a collective, which is why one of my other campaigns, I'll just slightly divert, is to get the names of the ones that were on the committee. We can't name every single 1,400 girls, but to get the names of the 13 that were on the committees, to get them named and their names known, and ideally read out on International Women's Day in Parliament. I mean, that's my absolute dream, to get that done. And we are working on that, but it's a big thing to achieve. But that would be amazing to me, and I really, really want to get those 13 names known. I just want them to be known names. But going back to the blue plaque thing, we can't fit 13 girls' names on a blue plaque. It's too much. But there is an application in by the residents of the Bow Quarter, which is now the name of the factory, to have an English Heritage blue plaque, to an official one to the Matchgirls. I don't actually know what the wording would be, but that's well underway, and I think it's hopeful that will be approved at some stage fairly soon. But we have got an aspiration to also, we're researching all of these girls, and we'd like to get plaques to each of them, really. So we know where my great-grandma Sarah, we know where she grew up and where she lived at the time of the strike. We also know this Kate Sclater I mentioned earlier, who was born in Southampton. We know where she was born in Southampton. So what we'd really like to do is get all of them an individual plaque where they grew up or where they were born, to commemorate each of them. And then I guess kind of the other end of their life as well, we'd also really like to find out where they're all buried. So we found Sarah's grave, and we're doing our best to save it by hook or by crook. How that ends up working out, I don't know, but we know at least of one other the leaders, I call them leaders, the ones that were on the committees. We know where one other is buried. We've yet to see it because of COVID. But what we'd really like to do is find out where they all are and make sure they've all got a fitting tribute at the end of their life. So in fact, the more we think about it, the more campaigns we keep coming up with. So we'll probably be doing this until I retire. Yeah, it's ways of commemorating them is definitely on our list. And whether it's official English Blue, English Heritage Blue plaques we do, or whether we have a kind of, charity branded or the local council branded kind of plaque is up for debate at the moment. But there's so many different ways that we can commemorate them. I mean, we were just recently talking to Tower Hamlets Council about another potential way that we could commemorate the Matchgirls in the borough so that people know more about them. And another really lovely thing that happened recently was one of the local residents who actually heard me talking last June, I think, about Sarah's campaign to save her grave. They actually knew of a new block of flats that was being built in Tower Hamlets. And so apparently they were after names. And so this person proposed that the name is, the new block of flats is named after Sarah Chapman. And we've now had it confirmed. The council's accepted the application and the proposition, and so in spring of next year we're hoping that's going to happen, and there'll be an opening ceremony. So things like that are just amazing. And but I'm really passionate that those kind of things happen for all of them, not just, I've obviously got a very personal connection to Sarah, but I don't want people for a second to think that my aspiration is just for her. I want, some people in the early days thought I wanted a statue to Sarah. I don't want that. I want a statue that commemorates all of them collectively, because they were a collective, and what they did was collective action, and it was brilliant, but they were individuals in that collective action.
What other ways can people get involved and sort of offer any help? Because I'm sure this is a campaign that so many people can happily get behind.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the first and easiest way is social media. Is I've been particularly busy lately, so I haven't really been on top of my social media thing. But really, when I get my act together, sharing and the stories that we put out, and sharing the campaigns, signing the petition, coming to the website in particular and giving us feedback, because we have a feedback page, and we'd really like to hear what people think about what we're doing, and if are we going in the right direction? Do people think we should be doing something else, or less, or more, or so we're very, very interested to have people's input on that. And people can sign up to our mailing list. So we try to send out, updates, try to do it monthly. So yeah, we try to keep people updated if they subscribe to the website. So they can subscribe to the website, they can share stuff on social media, they can come to our website and leave us feedback. If they want to volunteer to help in some way, we'd be really, really happy to hear from them. Hopefully, once COVID is past, by some point past the middle of this year, hopefully we'll start having events again, because we've got some amazing events coming up. Unfortunately, the next one is going to be still while we're in lockdown. We're going to celebrate something that was called the Match Tax Rebellion in 1871. So it's the 150th anniversary of that this year, and we are going to have an event. And one of the things that we're going to be asking people to do is to get involved in a social media campaign. So that is really something that people could get behind. I mean, we're going to have a hashtag and something that kind of links it to what we're trying to do. And so if people can get behind that campaign and share, follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, all of those kind of good things. But if people are really, really passionate to do something individually and get involved, then the best thing they can do is contact me, and we can work out where you know, where they could best fit in, you know, with their strengths. As I said, I spoke to a chap at the weekend, and he's got time and he just wants to do some research for us. So that's fantastic. You know, other people may want to help us give presentations or help run an event when COVID's gone, that kind of thing. And that's all the kind of thing that we're after. And just generally getting the word out there and spreading the word is what we're all about, really.
I think it's wonderful, and I'm pretty confident we can get a fair few people to definitely share what you're doing. But I think a few people will be really keen on getting involved and offer support and volunteer in whatever way they can. So what we'll do is, Sam, we will share all of your links, everything that you have available. We will bombard our website with. I would be really interested in getting those names as well, so we can get those up there. That would be absolutely fantastic. I feel like we are going to be doing this again, Sam. This has just been so interesting, and I've loved talking to you about this. I've wanted to know a bit more about this for quite some time, and I can't thank you enough for coming on and talking to us. It's been really excellent, so thank you.
It's been a real pleasure. Great to talk to you.
And as I say, we'll share all your links. We'll spread the word, shout it from the rooftops. If you have enjoyed this episode of The Social Ties, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe.
Keep the red flag flying here.